Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. Alex's camera was raised, his fingers trembling slightly as the lens focused on the man at the far end of the restaurant. The waiter had just stepped into the main dining area, carrying a tray loaded with glasses, his movements efficient but slow, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. For a moment, Alex couldn't understand why he was drawn to him. It wasn't the man's age. He was probably in his late 20s, early 30s at most. It wasn't his uniform either, a simple black shirt with a name tag that read David, and it wasn't even his job, serving food to the busy, animated crowd of dinner patrons. No, there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface, that made Alex's heart race as his finger hovered over the shutter button. Jack, sitting across the table from him, was too busy with his phone to notice. "Come on, Alex," Jack laughed. "You've been staring at him for ages. What, you think he's got a story or something?" Alex didn't answer. He simply kept his eyes trained on the waiter. The man was moving with a strange kind of rhythm. The way he wiped down the tables, the way he avoided eye contact with the customers, it was almost as if he was trying to remain invisible. But it wasn't just his demeanor that caught Alex's attention. It was his arms, the way his sleeves were rolled up, revealing long, disfigured scars that twisted up from his wrist all the way to his elbow. They looked fresh, the skin still uneven, angry with a mix of red and pale, almost white patches. The scars were jagged, like something had burned deep into his skin, as though he'd fought through some kind of fire, some unimaginable pain. Alex couldn't help himself. His fingers clicked the camera button. The shutter echoed through the room, sharper than he intended, a sound that briefly interrupted the soft hum of conversations around them. In that brief moment, the waiter's head snapped up, his eyes locking with Alex's for just a fraction of a second. Alex's breath hitched. The man's face, momentarily frozen, flashed a look of something Alex couldn't quite place: fear, discomfort, or maybe something even darker. But before he could decipher it, the waiter's gaze flicked away, and he quickly turned, disappearing into the back of the restaurant. "That was a weird look," Jack muttered, his voice a low chuckle as he reached for his drink. "Did he see you?" Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wasn't sure if the waiter had actually seen him, but if he had, it wasn't just a look, it was a warning that made Alex feel suddenly exposed, like he had just crossed an invisible line. "I don't know," Alex mumbled, staring at the screen of his camera. He zoomed in on the image he had just taken, studying the details. The waiter's scars were unmistakable, but there was something else. Beneath the harsh lines of the burns, there was a tattoo. A small one, almost hidden beneath the man's forearm, faint enough that it would be easy to miss. But Alex's trained eye caught it. He leaned in closer, his fingers trembling, as he zoomed in even more. The tattoo was dark, simple. A name and a date, just below the jagged scars. The name was hard to read at first, smudged from the camera's focus, but when Alex zoomed in, he could make it out. James McCaffrey. The date, directly underneath, made his heart drop. July 19th, 2006. Alex knew that name. He'd read about James McCaffrey in the local newspaper years ago. James had been a soldier, a young man in his mid-20s who had disappeared during a peacekeeping mission in a war-torn country. The story had made headlines at the time. The man had been reported as missing in action, and then nothing. No body was ever found. His family held out hope for a long time, but after years without any new information, they had all but given up. Alex stared at the photo again. Could it really be him? Could this scarred, troubled waiter be the same James McCaffrey who had disappeared years ago? "Dude," Jack's voice cut through the thick silence. "Are you gonna eat or what?" Alex blinked, snapping out of his thoughts. He put his camera down on the table, his mind racing. The connection felt too real to be a coincidence, but It wasn't like he could just walk up to the waiter and ask him if he was James McCaffrey. That would be insane. And yet, the tattoo, the name, it was undeniable. He glanced over at the waiter again, but he had already disappeared behind the swinging door that led to the back of the restaurant. Jack was still talking, but Alex wasn't listening anymore. His mind was elsewhere, following. A trail of clues he wasn't sure he should be chasing. The image of the waiter's tattoo haunted him, James McCaffrey. Missing in action, a soldier thought to be dead. And now, Alex had a photo that had been taken in the middle of a restaurant, with no intention of uncovering a secret so heavy it felt like a burden already. "Alex, you good?" Jack's voice was louder now, snapping Alex back to the present. "Yeah," Alex answered quickly, his voice tight. "I'm fine." But as he tried to focus on the conversation again, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something had changed. He couldn't stop thinking about the waiter's face, the warning in his eyes, and the deep, unsettling pull that kept dragging him back to the photo. What had he just stumbled upon? A man who looked like he had been through hell? A soldier who had been presumed dead? Or was it something darker? Alex's chest tightened as a creeping feeling began to rise inside him. The kind of feeling that told you that you were on the edge of a story you weren't meant to know. Minutes passed. Jack kept talking, but Alex couldn't hear him. His eyes kept darting toward the back of the restaurant, waiting, hoping to catch another glimpse of the waiter. But the man didn't come out, not for a long time. Finally, Alex stood up, feeling like he had to do something. Anything. He couldn't sit there, pretending like nothing had happened. He needed answers. "I'm going to the bathroom," he muttered. To Jack, who barely looked up from his phone, Alex made his way toward the back of the restaurant, his steps quickening as he neared the kitchen. He felt like an intruder, like a child sneaking into places he wasn't meant to be, but the pull was too strong. He reached the narrow hallway that led to the back exit, and there, just beyond the door, he saw the waiter again. This time he wasn't alone. A man was with him. He was older, built like a soldier, his uniform a little outdated but still functional. There was a hardness about him, an air of authority, of someone who had seen too much. He was standing just a few feet from the waiter, speaking in low tones. Alex couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way the older man's eyes kept darting over to the dining area made Alex's blood run cold. The waiter glanced up again, his gaze meeting Alex's for the second time. This time, there was no fear, there was no hesitation. His eyes were different, cold, distant, almost as if he had given up on hiding. As if he had realized that Alex wasn't just some random person taking pictures. There was something Alex needed to know, something deep and dark. But before he could gather his thoughts, the older man turned, his eyes narrowing at Alex. Alex felt the weight of the gaze, the unspoken warning in it. But then the waiter moved again, turning to walk toward the back of the restaurant, and the man followed. The moment passed, and Alex stood there, frozen. He had to know more. The truth was within reach, but how far would he go to find it? As Alex made his way back to his seat, he could feel the eyes of the man still on him, but something told him that this was only the beginning. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The waiter, the man with the scars, the tattoo, the name of a missing soldier, was not just a tragic figure in a restaurant. No, there was something more, something dangerous. Alex felt it in the pit of his stomach, like a storm was brewing. On the horizon, and he was standing right in its path, the events of the evening kept running through his mind. The tattoo, the date, the unspoken tension when the waiter and the older man locked eyes with him. It wasn't normal. No, this was not some simple case of a random person with a tragic backstory. This was something more. But what? As he sat back, down at the table, his thoughts were a whirlwind. Jack was still on his phone, oblivious to Alex's inner turmoil. The noise of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, the chatter of other diners seemed distant, muffled. Everything felt far away. "Everything okay?" Jack asked, finally glancing up from his phone, noticing Alex's faraway look. "Yeah," Alex lied, trying to force a smile. He trailed off, unsure of how to explain what was happening in his mind. "You're acting weird, man. You sure you're all right?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're not gonna go all detective on us, are you?" Alex let out a dry laugh, but it didn't feel real. "Nah, just tired, I guess." Jack seemed satisfied with that answer and returned to his phone, typing away as if nothing had happened. But Alex couldn't ignore the unease that had settled. In his chest, he needed to know the truth, the photograph, the tattoo, the soldier. Everything about it screamed for answers. He couldn't just let it go. "Hey, man," Jack suddenly said, his voice a bit more serious this time. "You're still staring at your camera. What's up? Is it really that interesting?" Alex snapped, out of his thoughts, and looked at the camera, still sitting on the table in front of him. It was like a key, a small but essential clue that could unlock a bigger mystery. He had already looked through the photo dozens of times, zooming in on the tattoo, trying to make sense of it. But no matter how many times he stared at the image, it still left him with more questions than answers. "No," Alex finally said, his voice steady. "Just trying to figure something out." "You're creeping me out," Jack chuckled. "But okay, if you say so." Alex wasn't listening. His eyes were still fixed on the photo, but his mind was elsewhere, already plotting his next move. He had to find out more about the tattoo, about the man with the scars, about James McCaffrey. After dinner, they both left the restaurant, the cool night air hitting Alex's face as they stepped outside. The city was quiet, with only the distant hum of traffic to break the silence. It was a peaceful evening, but the mystery gnawed at him. "Hey, you going straight home?" Jack asked, pulling Alex out of his reverie. Alex shook his head. "I need to stop by the library first. Got some research to do." "Research?" Jack's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You're not really going to go digging into someone's life, are you?" Alex just nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. He couldn't stop now. The library was quiet, as it always was, late at night. Alex sat at one of the old wooden tables, his laptop open in front of him, and began his search. He typed the name James McCaffrey into the search bar, his fingers trembling as the results slowly populated the screen. The first few articles were exactly what he expected. Reports from years ago about the young soldier who had gone missing during a peacekeeping mission overseas. The articles painted James as a hero, someone who had given everything to serve his country, only to be lost in the chaos of a foreign war. There were tributes, memorials, interviews with his family, but the trail had gone cold. There were no updates after that, no news. But Alex wasn't satisfied. He had seen the tattoo on the waiter's arm. He had heard the name in the news. There was more to the story. He could feel it. He clicked on a few deeper archives, looking for something, anything, that could connect the missing soldier to the man in the restaurant. Then, buried in a dusty corner of an old news article, he found it. A single line at the bottom of a long list of names. James McCaffrey was last seen near a military base in 2004. No confirmed sightings since then. Alex's breath caught. No confirmed sightings since then. That was it. No body, no closure, no nothing. But why would a man who had been presumed dead turn up as a waiter in a local restaurant? What had happened to him? Why had he been hiding in plain sight? The mystery was becoming more complicated by the second, and Alex was no closer to an answer. He pulled up a few more articles, this time focusing on the army unit James had been with, hoping for a clue, anything that could explain the connection between the soldier and the man with the scars. But then something caught his eye. An old military report, one he hadn't seen before, detailing an incident involving soldiers who had been captured and tortured during a mission in the same area where James had disappeared. A shiver ran down his spine as he skimmed the document. Tortured, burned. Some of the soldiers had been left behind, their bodies barely recognizable. The hairs on the back of Alex's neck stood on end. Was James one of those soldiers? Was he one of the survivors of that hellish ordeal? Was that why he had scars on his arms? Scars that looked like they came from something far worse than a simple burn accident. Alex closed his laptop, his head spinning. This was more than he had bargained for. He couldn't just leave it here. He had to know the truth. He had to find James McCaffrey. He grabbed his jacket, feeling the weight of the mystery pressing down on him. He was no longer just a photographer, no longer just a curious bystander. He was now tangled in a web of secrets. Secrets that someone didn't want him to uncover. The door to the library creaked open, and Alex stepped out into the night. The cold air bit at his face, but it wasn't enough to shake the overwhelming sense of urgency that had settled over him. He had to find James, and if he did, he would have to face whatever truth the man was hiding. As Alex walked through the darkened streets, the feeling of being watched crept up on him once again. It wasn't just the waiter's eyes he was remembering. It was the man in the military uniform, the older man who had been with the waiter at the restaurant. Alex had to confront them. He had to understand what had happened to James McCaffrey, and more importantly, why he had chosen to stay hidden all these years. And then the thought struck him like a cold splash of water. What if James wasn't hiding at all? What if he had been forced into silence? Everything Alex thought he knew about the story was beginning to unravel. But what lay ahead was still unclear, and that, in itself, was terrifying. The night was unrelenting as Alex walked through the quiet streets, his thoughts racing faster than his feet could carry him. He had come this far, but the deeper he delved, the more elusive the truth became. The photo, the tattoo, and the waiter, they were all pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve. Yet despite his confusion, one thing was certain. Alex was on the edge of something big, something far bigger than a simple missing persons case. He hadn't realized how much time had passed until his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from Jack. "Dude, you good? Where are you?" Alex paused for a moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. Should he tell Jack everything? Could he? He wasn't even sure how to explain what had consumed his thoughts all night. The connection between the missing soldier and the waiter in the restaurant, James McCaffrey, the tattoo, the scars, the man who had disappeared without a trace, only to resurface as a waiter in a restaurant in a small town. It didn't make sense, and yet everything about it screamed that Alex needed to keep digging. He couldn't let this go. He typed back, his fingers moving quickly. "I'm fine, just got caught up in some stuff. I'll be home soon." He tucked the phone back into his pocket and turned down a narrow side street that led toward the outskirts of town. His mind wouldn't stop racing. What if James McCaffrey was still out there, hiding in plain sight? What if the scars were not just physical but psychological, a reminder of a past so dark that even a man who had once been a soldier was willing to bury it deep? A cold wind whipped around him, making him pull his jacket tighter. It was past midnight, and the streets were deserted. There were no cars, no sounds of people talking or laughing. Just the quiet hum of the world, oblivious to the mystery that Alex was diving into head first. He couldn't stop thinking about the older man, the one who had come out of the back room with the waiter, the one who had looked at Alex like he knew. Something was wrong, like he knew Alex was getting too close to the truth. What was his connection to James McCaffrey? Was he a part of this hidden world of soldiers, of men who had disappeared? Alex stopped in his tracks. His breath was visible in the cold night air, and a sense of unease washed over him. His phone buzzed again, pulling him out of his thoughts. Bro, seriously, what's going on? I'm getting worried. Alex knew Jack meant well, but there was no turning back now. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was a need, a deep, insistent pull to know what had happened to James McCaffrey. He looked around, the shadows of the buildings stretching long across the street, the pale glow of the streetlights casting an eerie light over the pavement. The quietness felt almost unnatural. He was too far from the main roads now, and he was aware of how isolated he was. For a brief moment, a chill of fear ran up his spine. He wasn't sure why, but something told him he needed to go back to the restaurant, not just for answers, but for closure. He had to confront the waiter again. He had to see if the man would talk to him. Without another thought, Alex turned around and headed back toward the restaurant. It felt like he was being pulled by some unseen force, a magnet drawing him closer to the truth, to the one question that had been haunting him since the moment he took that photo. Why? The restaurant was just as quiet as the streets outside. The neon sign above the door flickered faintly, casting a soft glow on the pavement. Alex stood for a moment, staring at it, gathering his courage. It was strange how, in the course of one night, everything had shifted. What had started as a fleeting curiosity, just a passing moment of intrigue, had turned into something much bigger, something much darker. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The familiar smell of food and cleaning products hit him immediately. The atmosphere was subdued, the night shift workers moving quietly between tables. But as soon as the door closed behind him, Alex could feel the tension in the air. The waiter, David, was nowhere in sight. Neither was the older man who had been with him earlier. The restaurant seemed empty of life now, just the faint hum of the kitchen behind the door and the clink of plates being wiped down. Alex made his way to the counter, his eyes scanning the room. He didn't know what he was hoping for, an explanation, a sign, anything. His heart was racing, and he had to fight the urge to turn around and leave, but he had come too far to back out now. "Can I help you?" The voice came from behind the counter, and Alex turned to find a young woman standing there. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, but she was smiling politely. Yeah," Alex stammered. "I was here earlier. I just wanted to ask about one of the waiters, David." The woman's smile faltered just slightly, but only for a second. "David's not working tonight," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Can I get you something else?" Alex hesitated. "When will he be back?" She glanced around, making sure no one was listening, then leaned closer, her voice dropping even lower. "Look, I don't know what your deal is, but I wouldn't go digging around about David. Some things are better left alone." The words hit Alex like a slap in the face. His stomach twisted. "What do you mean? What's going on with him?" The woman hesitated, looking around again before lowering her voice even more. "You don't know anything about him. I don't know how you know his name, but you should stay away. People around here, people like him, they don't like being bothered." Alex could see the fear in her eyes now. He had crossed a line, but that only made him more determined to push further. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to understand." The woman looked away, visibly shaken, before she finally spoke again, almost in a whisper. "I don't know what happened to him, but people think he's dead. That's all I know. He just showed up one day and things changed. Just be careful, okay?" She turned quickly, walking toward the back of the restaurant, leaving Alex standing there, his mind spinning. He needed to know more, but something told him that he was about to uncover something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. He walked out of the restaurant without another word. The cold air outside hit him with a sharp sting. His heart pounded in his chest, but he wasn't about to turn back now. He couldn't stop. He had to find the truth. The next day, Alex returned to the library, his mind running through everything he had learned so far. He needed answers, more than just a few pieces of a puzzle. He pulled up the old articles again, this time focusing more closely on the details of the soldiers who had disappeared in the same region where James McCaffrey had been stationed. The reports about the survivors, those who had been left behind after the ambush, were sparse, but Alex was persistent. It took hours, but eventually he found something. One name kept appearing in every report. A name Alex hadn't seen before. A name he hadn't recognized, but it was the connection he needed. John Miller. John Miller had been the commanding officer of the group. The one who had survived, who had been tortured, who had barely made it out alive. And according to the articles, John Miller had been one of the last to see James McCaffrey alive. But what if the truth was that James had never truly gone missing? What if instead he had been left behind, abandoned by his own comrades, forced to live in hiding, to bury his past? Alex leaned back in his chair, the weight of the discovery settling over him like a heavy fog. He wasn't just unraveling a missing persons case. He was uncovering a story of betrayal, of survival, of men who had lived through hell and never talked about it. And now, Alex was about to find out how deep this rabbit hole really went. Alex's heart was pounding as he walked toward the address. He had uncovered. It wasn't a long journey from the library, but every step felt like an eternity. The revelation he had uncovered, the story of John Miller and James McCaffrey, the survivor of a war so brutal that it had left its mark on every person involved, had changed everything. What had started as a simple curiosity had evolved into something so much larger, so much darker than he had imagined. He wasn't just investigating a missing person. He was diving into the wreckage of a broken past, one that no one had dared to talk about. And now he was heading straight toward the heart of it, the place where everything would finally come together. The address he had found led him to a small house on the outskirts of town, far from the lively streets he was used to. The house was simple, modest, almost hidden among overgrown hedges and a cracked stone driveway. It seemed out of place, abandoned even, like the world had forgotten about it. But Alex knew better. He had tracked down this place after connecting the dots between John Miller, James McCaffrey, and the town's long-hidden secrets. James had been hiding in plain sight for years, but no one had recognized him, not until Alex stumbled onto the truth. He stood at the front door, unsure of what he would find. The fear that had gnawed at him for days now turned to resolve. He had come too far to turn back. This was it, the final confrontation. He had to face James McCaffrey, the man who had been presumed dead, who had disappeared without a trace, and find out what had really happened to him. Taking a deep breath, Alex knocked on the door. For a moment there was no answer. The silence stretched out, suffocating and thick with anticipation. Then, just as Alex was about to knock again, the door creaked open, revealing a man in his late 30s, a face weathered by years of hardship and pain. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, but they held something else, something deeper, something broken. James McCaffrey. Alex's throat tightened as he looked at the man standing before him. The scars that twisted up his arm, the tattoo Alex had seen, were all visible now, too real to ignore. But there was more than that. It wasn't just the physical appearance of the man. It was something about the way he carried himself, the weight of the past in his every movement, the way he seemed to carry the memory of things long buried. "I know who you are," Alex said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You're James McCaffrey, aren't you?" James didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped aside, silently, inviting Alex into the house. Alex hesitated for only a second before he entered, his eyes scanning the inside of the small, dimly lit home. It was sparsely furnished, with little more than a few old chairs and a small table in the center. The walls were adorned with faded photographs, some of them military pictures, others of a younger man, one that Alex recognized from the articles he had read. James McCaffrey in his prime, a soldier before the war had broken him. James closed the door quietly behind him, then turned to face Alex. His expression was unreadable. "Why?" Alex asked, his voice raw. "Why did you disappear? Why did you leave everyone to believe you were dead?" James didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the table and picked up a framed photograph. He looked at it for a moment, then placed it back down and turned to face Alex. "You wouldn't understand," James said quietly. His voice was hoarse, as if he had not spoken much in years. "Try me," Alex replied, his frustration bubbling up. "I know what happened. I know about the mission, the ambush. I know you were left behind, abandoned." James's face tightened, and for a moment Alex saw the flash of pain in his eyes. "You think you know what happened? You don't," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "You have no idea what it's like to be trapped in a nightmare, to watch your friends die, to be left behind in a place where no one cares. I didn't disappear, Alex. I was left to die. And I did. In every way that matters, I died that day." Alex felt the weight of James's words like a punch to the gut. The man standing before him wasn't just a war hero who had survived a brutal conflict. He was someone who had lived through horrors that Alex couldn't begin to comprehend. And yet James had somehow come back, had found a way to keep going, to keep surviving. "I wasn't abandoned by my comrades," James continued, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "I was abandoned by the people I was supposed to trust the most, the ones who were supposed to save me, but in the end, they didn't." Alex stood there speechless. He had always believed that the military, the people who swore to protect each other, would always have each other's backs, but the truth was far darker. James had been left behind, not by strangers, but by those who should have been his brothers in arms. "But you didn't stay dead," Alex said quietly. "You came back. You lived a life here in this town. Why?" James's eyes flickered, with something close to anger. "Because I had no choice, because no one knew I was still alive, and I had nothing left. So I ran. I hid. I built a new life, even if it was a lie." Alex could see the turmoil in James's eyes. The man wasn't just living with scars on his body. He was living with the scars of betrayal, of loss, of a life shattered beyond repair. And no one had known, no one had understood. "I tried to go back," James said, his voice breaking slightly. "I tried to rejoin my unit, to find some way to make sense of what happened. But it was too late. They had moved on. And when I finally got word that they were coming to look for me, I knew what I had to do." Alex's breath caught in his throat. He could see now, in full, the weight of James's pain. The scars on his arms were not just physical. They were symbols of something much deeper, a truth that James had carried with him all these years, unable to share it with anyone. "And so you ran. You started over," Alex said softly. "I started over, yes," James answered. "But I didn't live. I existed. That's all I could do. I didn't want anyone to find me. I didn't want to be reminded of what I lost." Alex stared at the man before him, trying to understand. He had been searching for answers, but now that he had them, they didn't seem to make things any clearer. James McCaffrey wasn't a hero, wasn't a victim. He was a man who had been broken by war, by betrayal, by the realization that he had no place in the world he had once known. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," James continued, his voice quieter. Now, almost apologetic. "But when you walked into that restaurant, when you took that picture, I knew this day was coming. I couldn't keep running from the past. And now, here you are." Alex's heart ached for James. He had been right all along. This wasn't just a story of survival. This was a story of a man who had been forced to become a ghost, to hide from a world that didn't understand him, to hide from a past that had consumed him. "But you were willing to let people believe you were dead," Alex said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Why?" "Because the truth is, I wasn't just a soldier who went to war," James said. "I was a man who came back broken. I couldn't let anyone see me like this. I couldn't let anyone see the man I had become. And if that meant letting the world believe I was dead, then so be it." There was a long silence between them, heavy with the weight of James's words. Alex's mind spun, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. The truth was devastating. James McCaffrey wasn't just a missing soldier, he was a man who had never truly returned from the war. He had been left behind in ways that no one could ever understand, forced to live in the shadows of his own past. "So, what now?" Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What happens next?" James looked at him, his eyes full of resignation. "I don't know. I've lived in the shadows for so long that I don't think I'll ever be able to step into the light again. But at least you know the truth now. That's all I can give you." Alex swallowed hard, his own heart heavy with the knowledge of what James had endured. He had come for answers, but now that he had them, he realized that some things were too painful to fix. Some truths were too painful to heal. "I won't tell anyone," Alex said finally. "I won't expose you, but I'll carry your story with me." James gave him a faint smile. "Thank you." As Alex turned to leave, the weight of the story settled over him like a blanket, a dark, heavy truth that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. He had solved the mystery, but in doing so, he had uncovered a world of pain and survival that few could ever truly understand. And for the first time, Alex understood what it meant to truly survive.